You're about to watch my conversation with Rob Moore. Rob is the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of MakerX. MakerX is specializing in digital product development for startups and venture builders. Some products coming out of MakerX include Data History Museum, where they create NFT artifacts of major historical events as they happen in real time, such as major earthquakes, as well as GoannaX, a collaborative work between Algoanna, a premier NFT collection on Algorand, and MakerX. This conversation was absolutely fascinating. We talked about everything from earthquakes to other ways that this technology could be used to advance science. We talked about a collaboration between Algoanna and MakerX that tracks the real price-time action of algo and market sentiment in real time, as well as a recent blog post that they posted which outlines an ethical, pragmatic Web3 decision framework. Within that framework, they discuss topics such as environment, energy, regulations, diversity, user experience, security, privacy, decentralization, and more. It was a fantastic discussion. Rob is doing so much in the ecosystem, it's kind of hard to keep up. So I hope you enjoy it just as much as I did. If you do, smash that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit me up down in the comments below to let me know what you think. All right, so I want to start with Data History Museum. It's a really interesting project on Algorand where you create NFT artifacts of major historical events as they happen in real time. So aside from this explanation, what is Data History Museum in your definition?
Well, I guess the interesting thing about Data History Museum is it was a first for us in a number of ways. So
Mm.
the company that I work for, MakerX, we do client work. We build ventures end to end, but more specifically, the digital products that power ventures. And we also build our own ventures when we've got a cool idea and we want to build it for ourselves. So Data History Museum was actually the first venture that we built for ourselves. And it was also the first thing that we built on Algorand.
Yep.
So I guess the way I normally describe Data History Museum is kind of by telling the story about how we came up with the idea of it. So essentially, we had this realization, and the realization came about by thinking about like a physical historical artifact that might sit in a museum. And we kind of realized that, like, we asked ourselves the question, why is it a historical artifact? Like, what makes it that? And we can model two intrinsic properties that we believe like answers that question. The first is the causality. So the idea that you can draw a causal link from that object in the current point in time all the way back to a point in time that it was either created or touched in history that made it a historic artifact. You can prove that that object was there at that point in time by using carbon dating. And then the second intrinsic property is originality, which is the idea that it's the historic artifact, not the copy that you can buy in the gift store for $10. Now, the realization that we had that spawned the whole idea of doing the Data History Museum was that a public blockchain, for the first time ever, gives you the ability to model those two intrinsic properties in a digital form. So the causal link becomes the mint time in the blockchain, which is publicly inspectable and immutable, which becomes the equivalent of carbon dating. And our, supposition is if you can mint a historic artifact close enough to the point in time that it actually happened, and you can prove that because you can see the mint time, then that becomes the causal link, that mint time. And then originality directly translates to non-fungibility. So we mint these things as a non-fungible token. And what we say is that if you meet these properties that we're talking about, these assets that we're minting are actually a verifiably authentic digital historical artifact. So that was the whole idea behind it, like the idea that spawned it. Now, interestingly, whilst we start from humble beginnings, we're, since I think it's the 25th of January, we've been minting every magnitude 5+ earthquake that's happened in the world. We started there because earthquakes are easy to understand. Most people kind of get them. They're interesting, and frankly, they're easy to get there. The United States Geological Survey publishes them as public domain, so it was just easy to implement. But our vision is so much broader than that. So first and foremost, we wanted to turn Data History Museum into a place where we mint, catalog, and curate artifacts that represent human, terrestrial, and cosmic events. So, for instance, we're taking the next step towards that at the moment. I think 2 weeks ago, we turned on solar flare minting in production. And actually, literally today, we turned on our video generation code for solar flares. It's quite cool. It goes and grabs the video that the satellite itself takes of the sun whilst the solar flare is happening. So you can actually see these little tiny pops of solar flare coming out. Is quite cool. So we turned the video generation on today in testnet, so that'll go on to mainnet, I don't know, later this week or next week. But to be honest, even that, human, cosmic, and terrestrial events is quite, it's just the first step in a much longer multi-year journey that we've kind of mapped out to actually kind of change the way that science is funded globally. So we're very ambitious with this one. But yeah, that's kind of what Data History Museum is to me, certainly.
That's fantastic. And you sort of led into my next question, which was, the Data History Museum currently focuses a lot on earthquakes, as you said. And my question was going to be, what historical events will you be focusing on next, which you kind of just touched on, but you also left a little Easter egg by saying, by leaving the next 4 or 5 years in place. So if you could maybe touch on what some of the long-term vision might be, that'd be kind of fascinating.
Yeah, sure. We've been spending a lot of time over the last few months on and off mapping out a more detailed roadmap. But the broad strokes are, so I said human, cosmic, and terrestrial events. So cosmics, obviously solar flares, I've just mentioned that, but like near Earth objects, new planets being discovered, etc. Human events would be things like, Supreme Court rulings is, I guess, a bit of a topic one at the moment. Sporting games, elections, etc. And then terrestrial events, obviously we've got the earthquakes. It might be hurricanes, new species being discovered, species becoming extinct, like just other things that are happening around the Earth. So they're all of the sort of different types of events, I guess, historic events that we can actually capture. Now, it takes a lot of work to create even one of those types of events. And it's been an interesting journey of discovery for our team, because basically you have to really understand deeply the data that you're kind of playing with, and the data source, and how to make sure that you're minting at the right time and making a decision about which things are significant enough to bother minting, and all of this sort of thing. And it's just time consuming. But more importantly, there's a important concept that we've baked into the design of Data History Museum that we're slowly working on, which is the idea of how do you verify the authenticity of the events that you are minting? So that's where we start to look at creating relationships with official bodies and scientists and the like, to essentially put their stamp on it, to say, hey, yep, we've looked into this, and we are validating that this is authentic. But then it goes a step further when you start then going to those organizations and getting them to provide unique data sources. One of the interesting concepts that we've thought about from the beginning is the idea of how do you make that causal link like as small as possible. So an example might be right now, for us to figure out that an earthquake's happened, we are looking at the public API that the USGS exposes. But for that data to land there, they've got sensor networks all over the world, and they do local processing, and then they send the data along to the USGS centrally, which does other data processing, which then eventually makes its way there. And so there's I guess a longer causal link, then maybe there could be, if, for instance, instead, if you were able to directly connect from the sensors themselves to, to a data feed that's generating them, that causal link becomes better. And so if you think about all the different types of, historic events that you could actually mint, how can you find an organization that has a unique data source that can have that verification that I talked about, potentially from even another different body, like an industry body or whatever it might be, or certain scientists that are reputable, or and then kind of get these unique data feeds to come in, so that our team doesn't have to do all of the work and become subject matter experts in every single domain of data that exists. Instead, we kind of get those other bodies to come in, and then we've designed a kind of circular economy around all of the different roles that would exist in this ecosystem, with a way of kind of, so you might think of it like royalties and that sort of thing. And then the longer term thing is the, hey, can we use this to actually fund science? And if you look at scientists today, they spend a lot of time filling out grant proposals and not actually doing science. If we can actually close the loop for, hey, some scientists have this idea of an experiment they want to run, and you can connect them to people or organizations or whatever it might be that actually believe in that science to invest in it, so they can go and do that. And then those people that invested can actually, again, get royalties from any value that's created from the actual output of the science itself, which themselves can get minted as historic artifacts because they're, interesting discoveries maybe. There's so many things to talk about. There's so much, thinking and planning, I guess, that we've already put into it and will continue to do so.
Yeah, you brought up an interesting point about how difficult it must be to ensure that you're getting not only proper data, but also that proper data in as close to real time as possible.
Yeah.
Are you guys using any specific Oracle services, or is it all kind of in-house data servicing at the moment? How do you guys go about trying to make sure that the mints happen as close to real time as possible?
It's a really good question. And I suppose a lot of the time that we've spent so far in building out Data History Museum has really been in building out what we're calling like a fairly sophisticated, highly dynamic, highly automated, highly reliable 24/7 sort of minting platform. And we've put a lot of effort into making it reliable, into making it so that it's low latency from end to end of we discover an event to it getting processed. The interesting thing, even beyond that, though, is we don't just mint these artifacts. We actually keep the metadata in them up to date. So, for instance, when we mint a earthquake, you can go and look at the traits on one of them, and you'll see that we minted the magnitude and the geolocation and the depth under the surface, and a few other properties. If you actually have a look at the history on them, you'll see that we actually most of them will have updates. Because what happens, we've discovered, is that one of the fun things we've learned about earthquakes is multiple things can happen that cause the USGS to update the metadata that they have on file about an earthquake. So one of them would be maybe there's an earthquake in Hawaii as a place that seems to have a lot of them. There's a network of sensors on Hawaii themselves that detect it. And often you'll see these IDs that come from USGS. From memory, I think the Hawaii ones start with HV, and then they'll have like a number. But then they've got other sensor networks all around. And interestingly, from what we can tell and what we've been able to read, the more data you get about an earthquake, the more accurate they can be. So there might be a sensor close to it that can quickly give some information, but then there's a sensor further away, like 100 kilometers away, and they can do data algorithms that kind of just add to the accuracy of what they know about that earthquake. But it takes longer sometimes for some of the stations to process, and so that data comes in later, and the data on file changes. And then sometimes we know that the scientists will go in and actually change things slightly by running other algorithms or whatever it is, the magical things that they do. So what that means, though, is that if you think about, okay, great, we minted an artifact like really close to when the event happened, but then 20 minutes later the data's changed slightly. And so our system picks that up and idempotently changes that record on the blockchain to add that update. Now, all of this is part of this, sophisticated reactive asset minting platform that we've built. And interestingly, what we realized is that platform has broader use beyond just Data History Museum. And so we've actually spent a bit of time essentially extracting it into its own platform, which we've called OnRamp. And we've got a number of customers we've been talking to that already have usages for it, and we've come up with another one for it that we recently published, the GoannaX dashboard, that I'm sure we'll end up talking about in a bit. The short answer to your question then is we've invested in building a sophisticated platform that, in a way, it kind of acts like an oracle. Essentially what it does is it allows you to take data from an external data source, which could be an API, a database, a corporate system, whatever, and then very quickly and accurately and robustly and all the other things I said, reflect that, create, read, update, and delete into the blockchain. The main goal of it really is actually in onboarding enterprise and corporate use cases that involve highly dynamic, high-scale asset minting for situations where those companies need to or want to take advantage of the architectural properties of a public blockchain. So immutability, transparency, public inspectability, ownership transfers, etc.
Yeah, I do want to talk about the goAnnaX that you were speaking of, but before we do, I want to speak a little bit more on MakerX, which is specializing in digital product development for startups and venture builders. So, what exactly is MakerX, and what does that sentence I just read mean?
Yeah, cool. So, essentially, MakerX is a company that my friend Matt Davies, who is our CEO, and myself, who's the CTO, founded, and we've actually just gone through our first year of operation. And essentially, there's kind of two parts to it. The first is the business model, and the second is the kind of focus area, which I kind of touched on before. So the business model basically comes about from the fact that Matt and I spent the last 10 years in enterprise and government technology consulting. Pretty sort of typical, I guess, professional services consulting, although I'd like to think we were very, very good at delivering, which isn't always the case in consulting. It's essentially a business model where you're trading time for money, and it can be quite transactional. Obviously, there's good ways of doing it, bad ways, whatever. But one of the things we learned from our years of doing this and have been, frankly, talking to each other about for the last 7 years, on and off, is this idea of, rather than trading time for money, instead, can you actually focus on delivering outcomes and make that the focus of what you do? And so the way I describe our company is actually not really a consultancy. It's more a hybrid between a consultancy and a digital product development company. So like a consultancy, we do work for multiple clients in multiple industries, and we deliver bespoke outcomes for them. However, as I said, unlike a consultancy, we don't trade time for money. We don't sell hours. We don't have a rate card or anything like that. We go to a customer, understand what they're trying to achieve deeply, mutually frame with them a set of business level outcomes that have very little implementation detail, and then give them a fixed price to deliver that outcome. And then the other part is that we our focus area is, as I said before, on helping to build successful ventures or businesses. Now, specifically, the part we focus on is on building the digital products that power these businesses. And so that's where we often either partner with venture builders or work for corporates if they're doing corporate ventures, or work with startups if there's like some founders and all of that sort of thing. Our focus is on being really, really good at the engineering part specifically, but we do the end to end. We have designers and all of that sort of thing. We build high quality digital products.
Fantastic. So it seems like MakerX is making a lot of products for private companies and businesses, maybe even governments. But you did mention that Data History Museum as well as goAnnaX were sort of like your first projects for yourselves. You guys also created an automated migration service for the Luna blockchain to Algorand, I believe, when that whole fiasco happened, and helped the Puffins NFT project migrate over to Algorand. Can you speak a little bit onto that automated migration service, and if anyone else has been using it, and if there's been like a real demand for this migration service?
Yeah, cool. So it's a funny story actually how that happened. So when the Terra crash happened, that was over the weekend, and then on the Monday, I don't know, maybe I was feeling a bit bored, or wanted to write some code or something, and I thought, you know what, I reckon I could take the intellectual property from the Data History Museum, which obviously, as I said, mints NFTs, right, from an external source, and very quickly create something that can read the Terra blockchain and, you know, basically spit out the equivalent NFTs. It was more just a bit of fun, to be honest. But I did that. It took me sort of 2 or 3 hours. I put it on Twitter, and I woke up the next morning and the tweet had like 36,000 impressions. It had kind of blown up a bit. Now, interestingly, you know, we've got a good relationship with the Algorand Foundation. We chat to them a bunch, and by the end of that Tuesday, we'd agreed with them that we would build, you know, a tool to help the Terra projects migrate over, and, you know, do a good thing collectively for them. And so within a couple of days, we had the landing page up and running, which you can see at migrate.algorand.foundation. You know, basically it was sort of an open thing for projects to come and sign up, essentially. We didn't actually migrate the puffins. They were already being handled by Kraken. But the Galactic Astros actually came through our service. And yeah, essentially then over the next 2 weeks, we built out the actual, you know, automated holder migration. So a holder can come in, they can connect their Algorand wallet, they can connect their Terra wallet, and essentially claim their one-for-one that exists in the Algorand blockchain that have been migrated over. Now, interestingly, we learned a lot from doing this. And one of the things we learned was that in that sort of situation where there's a compelling migration event, like, if you think about, like, if you're running a project and moving to an entirely different blockchain is a pretty scary proposition, because obviously you're going to be wondering, okay, well, is all my community going to come with me, and, you know, what's going to happen to our value and price and all that sort of stuff, right? And it probably just seems scary because, like, completely different blockchain, you don't know that much about it, and all of this sort of thing. And what we kind of realized was that in that sort of compelling migration event, like in this case, the blockchain unfortunately is kind of almost pretty much died, right? There's kind of a period of time of urgency, which we reckon is about 48 hours, maybe a little bit more. And then beyond that, you're kind of in sunk cost syndrome. And so the impetus maybe to actually move is kind of not there, or it's a lot harder. So interestingly, after the Galactic Astros, you know, it was probably just too late. And so we actually haven't had any others sort of come through. But yeah, you know, at the very least, we helped migrate the Galactic Astros,
and it's a tool that still exists in case anyone is interested in migrating over still. I mean, I think there's also a case that
of course,
it still might just be a very you know, even though that tweet might have got a lot of impressions, there might be many people that are unaware on what the tool is or how it works or what have you. So maybe this will help.
The other thing to keep in mind is, you know, look, the tool itself is a good baseline maybe for potentially helping other chains migrate, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, there's always potential in the future to harness it in that other way as well.
Absolutely. I mean, sometimes you know, a tool comes along and it takes a little bit to find its product market fit, but sometimes it happens and it kind of surprises you in the way it does. So we'll see.
Yeah,
I do want to speak a little bit on goannaX, because that is a collaboration between MakerX and Algoanna, you know, a premier NFT collection on Algorand. How did this collaboration come about, and what exactly is the collaboration?
Yeah, good question. So Benji, who's the creator of Algoanna, lives in Australia, like myself and Matt. And I think just through, you know, like quite a big sort of Algorand network in Australia, there's quite a few people. And it was funny, you know, they're all sort of like talking to each other and connecting each other. And I think a couple of different people kind of connected us to Benji, and we were just chatting with them. And I don't know, I think we just really hit it off. You know, we've had a number of really great chats with him, and we found ourselves very like-minded. And I think at one point, Matt and Benji were having a chat about like Data History Museum and what we'd done, and Benji was like, oh, it's cool what you've done. I've always had this vision of creating these like dynamic NFTs that update based on like, like the price of the algo or whatever it might be. And we were like, oh, cool. And that was kind of one of a number of things that sort of spawned us to like, spurred us, I should say, to pull out OnRamp as a platform. And so apart from changing Data History Museum across, which it now uses OnRamp, GoannaX was the first sort of thing that we launched using OnRamp specifically. And yeah, essentially, look, we just partnered together. In this case, Benji did all of the artwork. We both worked together on the idea of what it could be and what it would look like. We've obviously implemented these dynamic NFTs that are changing every hour based on the price of the algo. And so essentially the way that it works is every hour the NFTs update, and everything that you see on this is the dashboard that we publish, which is at algoanna.makerx.tech. This shows the current sort of image of the actual NFTs, these dynamic NFTs, right? And so the expression changes based on the percentage sort of change with the different windows, like 30-day versus 7 versus 24-hour versus 1. The GIF changes from either being upwards, I think that one's based on the 24-hour price change, or flat or downwards. The fear and greed index changes daily based on the fear and greed index at alternative.me. And then the piece de resistance is the bit at the bottom, which is our multi-layer generative art, where the background changes based on the 30-day price change. So, that was above 10%. So we're on the moon. The vehicle changes based on the 7-day, which I think is sort of, average. So we get this sort of crappy, rusty car. The clothing changes based on the 24-hour, and then the expression of the goanna changes based on the last hour. And so every hour this picture changes, and we actually tweet. We've got a bot that tweets it every day as well. It's quite humorous, the artwork in there. It's a take on the sort of the humor in the crypto industry. So like the most amazing image is like a Lambo on the moon. And it goes all the way back down to to other stuff. There's 2,401 combinations of that one, so that one's quite cool.
Wow.
So yeah, look, to be honest, we just had a lot of fun with it. And look, there's certain things that we might do in the future with this as well. There's some interesting ideas that we've got. Maybe we might sort of explore what it looks like to create dynamic ad NFTs. This is one option we had. Either way, we had a lot of fun, and it's a really nice demonstration of the power of that OnRamp platform that I was talking about before.
Absolutely. And when I did a little digging on OnRamp myself, it according to the Twitter post I read, at least, it allows for the rapid minting, as you stated, of automated digital asset records on Algorand at scale. We mentioned some of the use cases already, and some of them are already happening in real time. But other use cases include event ticketing, certification, licensing, corporate asset tokenization, decentralized identification, and a lot more. So I'm actually really curious on what types of use cases you're most excited for this type of tool, and how you think it'll likely be used the most in the future, maybe over the next couple of years.
So I'm a huge fan of value, delivering value, right? Doing things that are meaningful. And I think it's fair to say that not in all instances, and certainly Algorand's probably better than most, but in the crypto/Web3 industry in general, there is a lot of tech for the sake of tech, and a lot of focus on the technology. And I think, it can't become mainstream until the tech is an implementation detail that washes away, and the thing that's up in lights is the value that you're generating. And so the thing that excites me about this particular platform is twofold. Firstly, the fact that you could use it for really impressive, valuable use cases. The event ticketing one's maybe an interesting one to pick on. You could think about the concept of maybe an existing like event ticketing company they have like a database or a system that you can go to a website, put down a credit card and buy a ticket, and you get a ticket. Great. OnRamp could help you very quickly take data from that existing database or API or system, whatever, and then reliably reflect them into ticketing NFTs. And then when you are at the event, you could easily create like a mobile app or a web app or whatever it is that enables you to, with your your NFT, so you would claim it. You'd probably log in with your existing account that you used with your credit card to buy it. You'd connect an Algorand wallet, claim your NFT, and then from there you'd be able to interact at the event. And maybe it might be something like, say it's a conference or something, there's sponsor stalls. You go to a sponsor stall and interact, you get a stamp or something. Or maybe you pay some money or do some sort of activity and it upgrades your ticket to a gold class ticket or whatever. There's so many different ways that you could interact, right? That could then get recorded. And then you'd have this record of the NFT, and it'd have metadata and a picture or whatever, that reflects your experience at that event, and you would own that in your wallet. And maybe that's something that you just kind of keep. Maybe it's something you try to sell because you think, hey, mine's the most rare, whatever. There's a number of different kind of things that you can do there, right? Sentimental or value-wise or whatever it might be. Or maybe you use it to prove that you have been to a certain number of events. Maybe there's like a loyalty thing with that particular ticketing company. There's so many kind of ways that once you've got a really nice way of representing ownership and, transfer or, the immutability, the public inspectability, etc., right? All of these properties that exist in the blockchain, they're useful building blocks to build value, right? They're just the implementation detail. So that's the first thing, is that you could actually do some interesting things. And I think the at scale and the dynamic nature of it are the bits that are really important, and the fully automated. This OnRamp platform, you don't go to a website and upload an image and type in the asset name. It's all driven by APIs. It's completely automated, which is important to do things that are high scale. And when I say high scale, I'm talking tens or hundreds of thousands of assets, maybe more, maybe millions. And dynamic, they can change, right? You can do things that change them. They're not like this static one-off thing. Now, the second thing that excites me is the idea that with the way we've designed it, you can use the OnRamp platform and not know anything about Algorand or Web3 or IPFS or how to secure an account mnemonic for an automated process, or the metadata standards that exist in Algorand and which one's the one you should use, and all of that stuff, because we've taken care of all of it. We've abstracted all of it away behind a very simple interface that enables you to basically send us a payload that is a general kind of digital asset payload. Doesn't really have anything kind of blockchain-y in there. We handle all the rest. We handle, cool, this one's ARC69, we'll put the metadata in the right place. This one's ARC19, we'll mint something into, save something into IPFS and then, put that into the reserve address, etc. And so what we've done is basically created, this is part of why we call it OnRamp, a OnRamp for quote unquote maybe Web2 developers or existing corporate teams, whatever, to basically create things that can be put into mainnet in days or maybe small number of weeks, rather than spending months. Because we spent like 6 months building out a lot of this stuff for Data History Museum before we pulled it out into OnRamp. And it is months. If you want to build something where you have to understand all of those different things and build something that's a scalable, reliable, 24/7 system, that obviously takes time. And so the exciting thing is we can couple real use cases with getting them in working with very small amounts of code in days or single digit weeks. And so, for instance, the GoannaX dashboard, the dynamic NFT part of that took me like 2 to 4 hours to do. That's it, because it's just so easy.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. I mean, it does seem like these types of enterprise grade tools are kind of what the space needs to onboard all of the companies or just people, individuals in general that are wary or really have no understanding of the blockchain space. Because as you said, it really is going to come down to the concept of the tech kind of abstracting away, as you put it, because you don't think about all the technology that Facebook's run on or any of the apps on your phone are run on. So, like the conversation around tech, although we may find interesting, it's not going to be what onboards. The next million, 2 million, people or what have you. It's going to be the next amazing app and the really great user experience that's delivered by
Yeah.
tools like this. So that's a really great discussion. Now, MakerX recently published a paper titled The Ethical Pragmatic Web3 Decision Framework. And in it, it touched on things like environment and energy, criminal activity, regulations, diversity, user experience, as we just touched on, security and privacy, decentralization, and more. Would you be able to touch a little bit on the decision behind creating this framework in general and what you hope to achieve by doing so?
Like I said, last year, calendar year, we came up with the idea of the Data History Museum, and look, a number of us, myself included, were reasonably skeptical, I guess, about using a blockchain solution because you look at the general kind of perception in social media in particular, and there's a culture war raging, right? On one hand, you've got people saying this is going to change the world. Screw the government, screw big corporations. We're going to replace all of it, and the whole world's going to be decentralized. And on the other hand, you've got people saying this thing is evil, and anyone that has anything to do with it is evil, right? And they're two very, very big extremes that are very emotional,
Yeah.
and both of them are very present. And so I and my colleagues were seeing, over the last sort of 6 months before we started working on this blog post and started working on the Data History Museum, we were seeing this like cultural war raging, right? And so kind of naturally you're very hesitant to step into that. Especially because, like I said, we're a new company. We're trying to get our brand out there and hire people and, doing that with good conscience, right? And having something when we wanted to basically two things. Firstly, if we're trying to recruit someone, have a really, and they're a bit kind of on the fence about it because they see all this stuff on their social media, we wanted to have a really good answer for them about, what? Understand where you're coming from. We felt the same thing. So we went and actually did the research and informed ourselves and made an informed opinion about what we were and weren't comfortable participating in versus, we're just doing it just because we felt like it or for the money or whatever it might be, right? And on the other hand, all of the people that we're hiring, very principled people, we've got particular values and principles that we, build into our company and our culture, and we care about each other and we care about the environment. We care about, like I said before, delivering value and not just speculating or just doing tech for the sake of tech or whatever it might be. And basically, I spent a good sort of 6 months going pretty deep and reading as much as I could to really understand the good, bad, and the ugly of this entire space and building out. And I didn't find anything, to be honest, that was comprehensive enough for my liking because most things that I read were biased on one way or the other. And I couldn't find things that were really balanced and sort of really called out the bad stuff, but at the same time talked through, okay, if you took a pragmatic and ethical lens, how could you address these bad things and still be comfortable? And so that's basically what we did. So we created this decision framework, and the idea is that this framework would allow any individual or company to make an informed decision about what they were, as I said before, what they were and weren't comfortable participating in this space. So we did that. We published that out for anyone to use because, again, we couldn't find anything that comprehensive. And so we wanted to put it out there so that other people could make use of it. And then we ran through the framework ourselves so that we could figure out what we were comfortable participating in as MakerX. And interestingly, it's one of the key reasons why we using Algorand, right? Because it stacks up very well against this framework. It's obviously the green blockchain, right? It's carbon negative. It's been designed from the ground up by very, very clever people to be very, environmentally conservative. A lot of the use cases that we're seeing on Algorand are more serious, more value centric things, rather than just a focus on speculation and the more pyramid scheme style of things. Obviously, the speed and cost and instant finality and all of that sort of thing in Algorand, from a pragmatic perspective, works really well, and it allows for things like the Data History Museum, which would not be possible on something like, say, Ethereum, where the gas fees of minting all these assets, we're minting every day, we're minting earthquakes, right? So anyway, that's kind of why we did it and where we landed on, and a little bit about why we're actually using Algorand.
No, that's terrific because that was about to be my next question on why did you end up landing on Algorand? And were there any other blockchains that came pretty close to choosing that one over Algorand?
Interestingly, because our first foray was the Data History Museum, and that has a very specific kind of need, right? Things like to protect the causal link, we need to be able to mint quickly. So something that's got like a 40-minute confirmation time, and then your transaction didn't quite commit, didn't really cut it, let alone the fees side of it. Algorand was clearly the best for all of those reasons for the Data History Museum. And once we've done that, we've obviously now got a lot of experience, a lot of intellectual property, some of which we've published out, like on our GitHub. We've kind of, in particular, we've got this really cool local sandbox experience that works for really quickly for local dev cross-platform, including Windows, and B, on CI/CD servers really quickly, which we use for all of our automated tests for OnRamp and Data History Museum. And so once we kind of built up all this intellectual property and experience, you kind of, and relationships with the foundation, for instance, and all of that, obviously we're pretty invested in Algorand now, and we've really enjoyed it, and we see the potential of it. So it's certainly, a big one for us. I guess there's other ones that are interesting. You look at Cardano is obviously got very good technology. Interesting at the moment, given John Woods has moved over. It's a little bit more expensive and a little bit slower than Algorand. That's not necessarily a problem depending on the use case you're doing. So I think maybe it probably wouldn't work for something like Data History Museum, but there'd be plenty of other things that it would work for. So I personally think that Cardano is interesting, and I'm actually interested in looking into it myself. Solana's fascinating to me, and certainly by the way, in this blog post, the pragmatic ethical Web3 framework, the speed and cost section on that blog post had quite a detailed look at all the different specs across them. And at the time, the one that stood out to me was Solana, because it had such a massive, it was like 400 millisecond blocks, which is the smallest out of any of them from memory, and quite a large TPS. Although, as we've seen in the last few months, maybe it's sort of trading off some stability for that. So I think that's interesting. I also kind of, all the time there's new ones that start popping up. There's one that popped up the other day that I thought looked really interesting, and I haven't honestly had time to deep dive into it, but it was Hedera, which I thought looked fascinating. But the nice thing, I guess, about Algorand, though, if you come back to it, is it's got kind of everything. They've solved the blockchain trilemma. It's been running in mainnet for I can't remember, it was 2 years now without any outages. Just every 4.5 seconds doing another block, right? It's rock solid. And, you can't argue with having someone like Silvio behind it, who's literally invented all of the cryptographic primitives behind every single blockchain, including Bitcoin. So, I don't know, interesting space, isn't it?
Absolutely. No, I can totally relate to some of the things you just said and why I've kind of dove headfirst into the Algorand ecosystem myself. So, for anybody that listens to this conversation and enjoys anything we spoke about, whether it's the Data History Museum, GoannaX, anything you're doing at MakerX, or even the framework that you guys published on your blog post, where can people go to learn more about you and all of these projects?
Yeah, so easiest way to follow myself or get in touch for a chat is on Twitter. So I'm at Rob D. Moore. The MakerX blog's probably a good one to snoop around in. So that's blog.makerx.com.au. So that's got stuff like the Web3 framework, our press release for things like the Data History Museum and goANNAX. And then the other one's probably maybe the GitHub for MakerX, which is github.com/MakerXstudio. So that's got our open source tools on there, including the local developer sandbox that I mentioned.
Awesome. Perfect. I will leave links to those all in the description down below as well, just to make it easier for everybody to, make their way around, because there's a lot going on. And honestly, I feel like we could have talked for quite some more time, but we're nearing the end of the hour, about 50 minutes in. So I don't want to get too deep into another conversation. So we'll save whatever's left maybe for another time.
Sounds good. Yeah, it'd be great to chat again in the future.
Perfect. I appreciate that. Thanks for coming on the show and sharing really all of this with myself and the audience.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, Rob. All right. Wasn't that a fantastic discussion? I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, smash the thumbs up button if you haven't already. Hit us up in the comments section. Check out the description down below for ways to support the channel, and we'll catch you in the next episode. Thanks.